Hollywood has its ghosts. Not the kind that fade with the credits, the kind that never left. In the haunted mansions of Beverly Hills, there's a room where people still smell rotting flesh, even though it's been empty for decades. At one of the oldest studios in Hollywood, a security guard watched a man walk through a solid concrete wall. The next day, his supervisor showed him a photograph. The man he saw had been dead since 1926, and his grave was on the other side of that wall. At a hotel on Hollywood Boulevard, a blonde woman keeps appearing in a mirror, then vanishing. Cursed studios where the famous worked until they couldn't leave. Hotels where stars checked in during the Golden Age and never checked out. Haunted mansions where secrets were buried so deep they soaked into the walls. In a town built on make-believe, these are the only things Hollywood couldn't script. In the hills of Beverly Hills sits a limestone estate called Greystone Mansion, and inside it, one room has been cold since the late 1920s. Not the whole building, one room. The East Wing guest room on the main floor. 10, sometimes 15 degrees colder than the rest of the house, regardless of season, regardless of what the heating system does. Modern thermostats struggle to explain the drop. A photographer hired to shoot the property walked into that room and smelled something. Rotting flesh, thick and unmistakable, like meat left in a room with no windows, pressing against his face, filling his throat. Though the room is physically empty, visitors today still claim to be hit by that same heavy, sickening scent. Because on February 16, 1929, 2 men were found dead in that room. Ned Doheny, the son who owned the mansion, and Hugh Plunkett, his secretary, both shot in the head. The official story came fast. Murder-suicide. Plunkett killed Ned, then himself. Case closed within days. But there were problems with that story, problems that turned whispers into legends and legends into hauntings. There was a 2.5-hour gap between when gunshots were heard and when police were called. The bodies had been moved before investigators arrived. Legend has it that a forensic officer found a cigarette still burning between Plunkett's fingers, still smoldering even though he'd been dead for hours. There was a woman's bathing suit by the pool. It wasn't Ned's size. The cook said Plunkett hadn't arrived alone the night before. By the time police got there, the bathing suit was gone. No one asked about the woman again. The deaths were tied to the Doheny family's involvement in the Teapot Dome scandal, a political corruption case from the early 1920s in which government officials took bribes from oil tycoons for drilling rights on federal land. Ned's father, Edward L. Doheny, was one of the central figures. Ned had acted as his courier, delivering $100,000 to the Secretary of the Interior, and had been called to testify. Some historians believe the murder-suicide story was staged, that Ned and Plunkett knew too much, and both men were killed to ensure their silence. Others think it was exactly what it appeared to be, a tragic end under unbearable stress. Questions endured, unanswered, long after the headlines moved on. For nearly a century, it has remained one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries. Across the mansion's 46,000 square feet, staff and visitors have logged hundreds of paranormal encounters, specific, consistent, the same things in the same places from people who had no idea what others had experienced before. In the bowling alley, people hear invisible pins being knocked down, the crack of a ball making contact, the scatter and roll, clear enough that people look around, certain someone must be playing. No one ever is. In the hallways, visitors catch a sudden wave of lilac perfume, thick, old-fashioned, belonging to another era. Most researchers associated with Lucy Doheny, Ned's widow, who lived here for 26 more years after that night. From the upper windows, people have reported seeing a man in 1920s clothing, standing completely still, staring out over the grounds. Others have seen him on the grand staircase, moving through the space like he owns it.
which once he did. Some believe it's Ned himself, unable to leave the place where his life ended in bullets and lies. Faucets turn on in sealed sections. Heavy doors slam in corridors with no draft. In the basement, reports describe an overwhelming feeling of being watched, something in the dark, just out of sight. The mansion was built in 1928 from Indiana limestone and steel, materials paranormal researchers argue conduct and trap residual energy. One of the wealthiest oil families in California, they had the money to build an empire and the power to control what happened inside it. Today, it's a public historic site. Film crews use it constantly. The Big Lebowski, There Will Be Blood, and dozens of others have shot here. People who spend extended time inside report a feeling that's difficult to name. Not fear exactly, but an awareness, the sense that the building is paying attention. Paranormal researchers classify what lingers in the East Wing as a residual haunting, not a spirit, but a recording, an event so charged with fear and cover-up that it burned itself into the limestone and steel and now keeps replaying. The cold, the smell, the sense that something happened there and never resolved. Lucy stayed for 26 years. She never spoke publicly about what happened. The lilac perfume drifting through the hallways, that's hers. Her presence, lingering in the home she refused to abandon. She died holding what she knew. The mansion is still there. The East Wing guest room is still there. The cold hasn't lifted. The smell returns. And whatever happened inside it, whatever truth was buried with two bodies in a woman's bathing suit that disappeared, never truly left. Greystone buried its secret in one room, but the ghosts won't let anyone forget it's there.
Greystone buried its secret in one room, but just a few streets away on Summit Drive, there was another mansion that couldn't contain what was inside it at all, a place called Pickfair Mansion, and eventually the owner tore the whole building down trying. For years, reports described laughter at night, women's laughter, multiple voices moving through the hallways, not distant, not faint, clear, like a conversation happening just around the corner, always in a room you'd just left. Reports described a daughter waking up screaming after seeing a woman standing at the foot of her bed. Reports of a white figure drifting through the darkened rooms when the husband was away. Cold spots appeared in certain areas of the house. The smell of rose perfume would fill rooms where there were no flowers, thick and floral and old-fashioned, the kind of scent women wore in the 1920s. It would appear suddenly, hang in the air for minutes, then vanish. And guests, famous guests, people who had no reason to make this up, reported seeing a dark-haired woman in old-fashioned clothing who would appear and then vanish right in front of them. Pickfair Mansion sat high on Summit Drive in Beverly Hills and belonged to two of the biggest stars of the silent film era, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. Mary wasn't just famous, she was the original movie star, America's sweetheart. Douglas Fairbanks was one of the most recognizable leading men in the world. Together, they were Hollywood royalty. And Pickfair was their palace. Albert Einstein stayed there. F. Scott Fitzgerald got drunk there. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor came for dinner. Life magazine described it as only slightly less important than the White House. An invitation to Pickfair meant you had arrived. Yet, unlike most haunted houses, Pickfair's story didn't begin with a tragedy. There was no murder, no scandal, no death on the property to explain what happened next. The hauntings began while the famous owners were still living there, before anything had gone wrong. Both Mary and Douglas reported seeing the spirit of a woman in a servant's uniform walking the hallways, not drifting, not fading in and out, just walking, purposeful and unhurried, as if she still had somewhere to be. Then came the attic. Mary Pickford started saying the house was haunted, not quietly, not to close friends after a few drinks, publicly, on the record.
In the early 1930s, she gave an interview to a journalist named Gladys Hall that was published in Motion Picture magazine. She talked about heavy footsteps in the attic that woke her in the middle of the night, rhythmic, tramping sounds, loud enough to pull her from sleep. She said one night she'd had enough. She spoke out loud to whatever was in the house and told it, firmly, like you'd tell a rude house guest, that if it had to be there, fine, but it needed to stop making noise. She specified that it wasn't being ladylike. The noise stopped that night. It came back later. Other reports followed. The cook quit after seeing a woman standing in the kitchen, dark clothes, just standing there, then gone. A house guest saw the same woman in a hallway and watched her disappear before they could even speak. Mary Pickford reported all of this publicly at the height of her fame. She wasn't looking for attention. She was just stating a fact about the house she lived in. Douglas Fairbanks never believed her. He was a man of action, physical, practical. He didn't believe in ghosts. They divorced in 1936. He died 3 years later. Mary stayed at Pickfair for 40 more years. By the end of her life, she'd become a recluse. Visitors had to call from downstairs and speak to her by phone. She stopped leaving her bedroom. The rest of the house sat silent around her. When she died in 1979, her widower, Buddy Rogers, reported something strange. He said a woman in white had appeared to him, moving through the darkened rooms. He believed it was Mary, and she told him to sell the house. He did. In 1988, actress and singer Pia Zadora and her husband bought Pickfair. Preservationists were thrilled. Finally, someone who would restore this piece of Hollywood history. Then, Zadora announced she'd demolished the entire 25-room mansion. The public was furious. Her explanation? Termites. Nobody believed it. Years later, she finally told the truth. She said the house was haunted, that reports of women laughing in the halls at night were real. She'd heard them herself, that her daughter had seen an apparition in her bedroom. But she added something more specific than anything reported before. A pale, tall woman who would appear and laugh mockingly at her children. Not at her, at her children. Whatever it wasn't just atmospheric, it was directed, targeted, cruel in a way that no amount of renovation was going to fix. She also described the sounds of a phantom party filling the empty rooms, laughter, music, the clink of glasses coming from spaces where no one was gathered. The whole house alive with the sound of people celebrating, except there were no people. And the rose perfume was so strong some nights, it filled entire rooms with the scent of someone who wasn't there. You can deal with termites, you can't deal with the supernatural. So they tore it down. The original gates of Pickfair still stand on Summit Drive. Behind them is a completely different house, but reports from people who visited the property or even just walked past it are still coming in. Cold spots, the faint smell of roses drifting over the fence, and in mirrors, just for a second, the glimpse of a woman in white. The mansion is gone, but the laughing ghosts of Pickfair didn't need walls. Whatever was inside that house wasn't attached to the building. It was attached to the ground. And they're still there, still laughing.
Greystone buried its dead in one room. Pickfair couldn't contain what was inside it. But tucked into the winding streets of Benedict Canyon, there was a house that absorbed something so violent, so mysterious, so shrouded in Hollywood's darkest cover-ups, that whatever remains there has never found peace. Locals don't call it by its address. They call it the House of Broken Beauty. In 1932, Paul Bern was one of the most respected men in Hollywood, an MGM producer, a gentleman, an intellectual. When he married Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde bombshell, the biggest sex symbol of her era, it shocked everyone. She was 21, he was 42. She was raw glamour, he was quiet refinement. They seemed like an odd match, but by all accounts, they were happy. 2 months later, Paul Bern was found dead in their Bavarian-style cottage in Benedict Canyon, a gunshot wound to the head, naked, a .38 caliber revolver beside him. The official story came fast: suicide. But before the first police siren reached Benedict Canyon, MGM had already sent their fixers. Louis B. Mayer, the studio head himself, arrived at the scene first, and with him came Howard Strickling, MGM's head of publicity and the most powerful cleaner in Hollywood history. His job wasn't to report the news, it was to make reality disappear. They had time alone in that house, time to manage the narrative, time to protect the studio's most valuable asset, Jean Harlow. The studio doctor was called before the police. By the time investigators arrived, the scene had already been arranged. A note was found, supposedly written by Paul. It read, "Dearest dear, unfortunately this is the only way to make good the frightful wrong I have done you and to wipe out my abject humiliation. I love you, Paul. You understand that last night was only a comedy." Years later, Bern's own gardener would claim the handwriting on the note didn't match his employer's, that by then the official story was set in stone. The note raised more questions than it answered. What frightful wrong? What happened last night? What comedy? And that word, humiliation. In a town built on virility and machismo, the rumors started immediately. Whispers about Paul Bern's alleged physical inadequacies, rumors of impotence or underdevelopment that supposedly made the marriage unconsummatable. The humiliation, Hollywood decided, was sexual. But modern historians believe the real humiliation was simpler and far more criminal: bigamy. Because Paul Bern had never divorced his first wife. Her name was Dorothy Millette, Paul's common-law wife from years before, a woman he'd been quietly supporting financially, who lived in a San Francisco sanitarium. She'd checked out the day before Paul's death, boarded a steamer headed to Sacramento. 2 days after Paul died, her body was found in the Sacramento River. She'd either jumped or been pushed. When authorities searched her belongings left on the steamer, they found a wrap, a pair of shoes, and a coat. No note, no explanation. Just a woman who ceased to exist the moment she became a liability to a movie studio. No investigation, no autopsy. Her death was ruled a suicide as well. The press ran with the suicide story for Paul. Case closed. But there were problems, deep, disturbing problems. Paul's butler said he heard a woman's voice and a second gunshot that night, hours after Paul was found. Unofficial reports and later investigations by studio insiders pointed to a second set of wet footprints leading from the pool to the house, women's footprints. They didn't match Jean's shoe size. The official police report never mentioned them. Jean wasn't even home that night. She was staying at her mother's house. Some believe Dorothy came to the house that night, that she confronted Paul, that the frightful wrong wasn't about Jean, it was about Dorothy, the woman Paul had never divorced, never publicly acknowledged, but never abandoned. Others believe Paul was murdered to protect MGM, that his death had nothing to do with love or shame, and everything to do with money, scandal, and the studio system's ironclad control over the narrative. The truth was buried with both of them. Jean Harlow never recovered. She refused to talk about that night. She remarried twice, but neither marriage lasted. Friends said she was haunted by what happened, by what she knew and couldn't say. She died 5 years later at 26, kidney failure. Some say it was a broken heart that killed her first. Jean Harlow never went back to that house after Paul died. MGM moved her out immediately. She said she couldn't bear to be there, that the place felt wrong, that it would always feel wrong. She was right. The house still stands in Benedict Canyon, and it has never been quiet since. Reports from residents over the decades describe the same things, the overwhelming feeling of sadness that permeates the property. Not anger, not fear, grief. Deep, unshakable, suffocating grief. In the master bedroom where Paul's body was found, people report cold spots that don't move, the scent of gunpowder appearing without explanation, sharp and chemical, in a room where no gun has been fired in almost a century. In the 1960s, Jay Sebring, the celebrity hairstylist and one of the most sought-after men in Hollywood, rented the property. Sebring, who would later be tragically murdered by the Manson family in 1969, told friends that he regularly saw the ghostly figure of a distraught man pacing the master bedroom.
He described the man in 1930s evening wear, walking back and forth, stopping at the window, then turning and pacing again. Always the same route, always the same expression of desperate agitation. Sebring said the figure never acknowledged him, it simply paced, hour after hour, night after night, as if trapped in a loop of indecision, unable to leave the room where everything went wrong. Later residents reported the same phenomenon, a man pacing, a man stopping at the window, a man who looked like he was waiting for someone who would never come. Some believe it's Paul Bern, still reliving the moments before his death, pacing, agonizing over the frightful wrong, unable to face what was coming. And late at night, from the area near the pool, the sound of wet footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking from the water towards the house. The pool was a centerpiece of the 1932 layout, and Benedict Canyon's unique geography causes sound to trap and echo in ways that can mimic footsteps, a natural explanation that somehow makes the reports more unsettling, not less, because when people go outside to check, the patio is dry, the footprints are gone, but the sound doesn't stop. Others believe it's Dorothy, the woman history erased, the one who was written out of the story so completely that most people don't even know her name, still walking from the pool to the house, still looking for the man who left her behind. People who've lived in the house since then have reported the same thing, and there have been many owners, none of them staying long. The house doesn't feel like home. It feels like a question that was never answered, a tragedy that was never mourned, a truth that was buried before it could be told. And in the master bedroom of that Bavarian cottage, something still paces, still waits, still searches for a resolution that never came.
Not every Hollywood haunting ends in blood. Some are just a party that never stopped. On Sunset Boulevard, a building that started as a mob-connected nightclub in the 1940s still hasn't let go of what it was. The place is called the Comedy Store now, one of the most famous comedy clubs in the world, and its paranormal reputation isn't just background color, it's a core part of the building's identity. The comedians who've performed here don't whisper about it privately. They talk about it openly, on podcasts and in interviews and in documentaries, because what they experienced wasn't subtle enough to dismiss. The hauntings are tied directly to what this building used to be. In 1940, Billy Wilkerson, the same man who founded The Hollywood Reporter, opened a nightclub at that address. He called it Ciro's, and for the next 15 years, Ciro's wasn't just a nightclub, it was the nightclub. Frank Sinatra performed there. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis performed there during the height of their partnership. The Sunset Strip belonged to them. But Ciro's had a shadow. Mickey Cohen, one of the most feared gangsters in Los Angeles, was a regular. The Sunset Strip in the 1940s didn't belong to the studios, it belonged to the mob. And the basement was where the real business happened. The rumors were always the same, that meetings happened down there that no one was supposed to see, that the soundproofed rooms were used for things that required soundproofing, that debts were collected in ways that didn't leave paperwork, that some of the people who went down those stairs didn't come back up the same way, or at all. During a formal investigation by UCLA parapsychologists, a psychic brought into the basement reportedly experienced intense, sudden phantom pain in his legs, unprompted, unexplained, and consistent with one of the mob's favored methods of sending a message. He couldn't walk for several minutes afterward. He said it felt like his knees had been broken. There was nothing in the room, but the basement remembered. Staff and security guards who go down there alone describe a heaviness that isn't just temperature, weight, like the air is thicker, like something is pressing against your chest the deeper you go. A dark, guttural growl has been reported coming from the darkness, not animal, not mechanical, something else, something that radiates what investigators describe as pure dread. A presence that doesn't feel like an echo of the past, that feels like it's aware of you. Up in the belly room, a smaller upstairs venue that used to serve as a private lounge for Ciro's elite, the activity is different. Almost playful, if you can call it that. Security guard Blake Clark became one of the most cited witnesses in the building's paranormal history after reporting that he repeatedly heard someone banging on the piano keys while the room was empty. Not random noise, deliberate, notes being struck on purpose. The moment he opened the door, it stopped, every time. He'd stand in the doorway, nothing. He'd step back, close the door, it would start again. Reports from waitstaff describe setting up the room for a show, lighting candles, arranging chairs, stepping out for 5 minutes and returning to find the candles blown out and the chairs rearranged, not knocked over, rearranged, stacked in the center of the room or pushed against the wrong walls, as if someone had decided the setup wasn't to their liking. In the main room and the original room, the oldest performance space in the building, comedians who've performed late sets talk about a presence, not something they see, something they feel, a weight in the back of the room, the sensation of someone sitting in the last row, watching, not laughing, not reacting to the act at all, just watching. Reports describe a man in a brown leather bomber jacket, vintage WW2 era, crouching in corners or watching from the wings. Always the same description: crouched down, eyes scanning the room, the posture of someone hiding, someone waiting for something they know is coming. Joey Diaz has described seeing figures in 1940s-style wide lapel suits sitting in the back of the room during sets, figures that don't react, don't laugh, don't move, just watch. One performer described looking up mid-set and seeing a man in the back corner, vintage suit, hair slicked back, sitting perfectly still while everyone else in the room was laughing. He looked away for a second, looked back, empty chair, but warm, like someone had just stood up and walked away. Sam Kinnishan had one of the most documented encounters in the building's history. The ghosts allegedly hated his style, the screaming, the intensity. During his sets, lights would shatter or simply cut out, equipment would fail. One night, Kinnishan had enough. Mid-set, he stopped and challenged them directly, told them to show themselves if they had something to say. The entire building went dark. Bobby Lee and Joe Rogan have both spoken at length about the building's energy on podcasts and in interviews. Lee describing being physically pushed in the hallways and hearing his name whispered when no one was nearby. And then there's Steve Lebetkin. In 1979, during a bitter strike between comedians and the Comedy Store's management, Lebetkin, a struggling stand-up who felt pushed out by the club, climbed to the roof of the Continental Hyatt House next door and jumped. He landed in the Comedy Store parking lot. He'd wanted to perform on that stage. He died in the building's shadow. Reports place his spirit near the entrance of the original room, the stage he wanted and never got. Not angry, not dramatic, just there, waiting, still, for his turn. Late at night, after the last show clears out, staff closing up report hearing sounds coming from underneath the stage. Not mechanical noise, not plumbing, something else. Muffled voices, the clink of glasses, music, not recorded music, live music, big band, horns and piano and bass, the kind of sound you'd hear drifting out of a nightclub in 1945. The basement is concrete and earth. There's nothing behind those walls, but the sounds keep coming, as if the room below is still full, as if the party never ended. It just moved somewhere you can't reach anymore. Some researchers describe it as the ground itself holding on, certain locations absorbing the concentrated emotional energy of what happened there and radiating it back indefinitely, not spirits choosing to stay, the earth replaying it. The same voices, the same clink of glasses, the same cigarette smoke soaking into concrete that absorbed it 70 years ago and never let go. The ghosts of Ciro's, still down there, still having the time of their lives. And the man in the suit, reported consistently across all 3 performance spaces, dark, 1940s cut, hair slicked back, watching without reacting. He's still in his seat, too. He doesn't care what the building is called now. He's not there for the comedy. He's there because that was his seat.
And in Hollywood, some people never give up their seat.
The Comedy Store holds decades of ghosts who refuse to leave the party. But to understand what happens when Hollywood doesn't just disturb the dead, but uses them, you have to go back to one of the most cursed film productions in history. When people talk about cursed Hollywood productions, Poltergeist is the one that always comes up. People compare it to The Exorcist, and the comparison makes sense on the surface. The Exorcist had fires on set, actors injured, strange accidents, but the Exorcist cast didn't die. And it doesn't start with rumors or superstition, it starts with something real. In the first Poltergeist film, there's a scene where actress JoBeth Williams, playing the mother, falls into a flooded, muddy pool in the backyard. Skeletons rise up out of the water around her. She's screaming, panicking, surrounded by bones. She thought they were props. Years later, she was at a social event and ran into someone from the special effects crew. She mentioned how realistic the skeletons had looked. He looked at her. They were real. Not rubber, not plastic molds. Real human skeletons. Medical specimens purchased from Carolina Biological Supply, a North Carolina company that legally sold anatomical specimens to educational and film productions at the time. And the crew didn't just drop the bones in the water, they dressed them, adding sculpted rubber and simulated decaying flesh to make the clean, clinical medical specimens look like disintegrating cadavers. They turned actual people into monsters to save a few dollars on the budget. Nobody told the cast. The movie was about a suburban family that built their house on top of a cemetery, about disturbing the dead, about what happens when you don't treat the dead with respect. And the production did exactly that. Then the deaths started. Dominique Dunn, who played the oldest daughter, was strangled by her ex-boyfriend John Sweeney 5 months after the first movie came out. She was 22 years old. She never woke up. Her family kept her on life support for 5 days before letting her go. Her killer was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. He got 6.5 years. He served less than 4. Julian Beck, who played the terrifying preacher Cain in Poltergeist 2, was already dying of stomach cancer when he took the role. He knew it. He did it anyway. He died before the film was released. Will Sampson, a member of the Creek Nation, played a shaman in Poltergeist 2. He was a real practicing shaman in his own life. When he found out the first production had used real human remains without telling anyone, he was horrified. He performed an exorcism on the set of the second film, a genuine spiritual ceremony, because he believed something needed to be cleansed. The cast said afterward they felt safer. Will Sampson died the next year after complications following a heart transplant. And then Heather O'Rourke, the little girl at the center of the entire franchise, died at 12 during production of the third film. For over a year, doctors told her family she had Crohn's disease. She didn't. It was a congenital bowel obstruction, something treatable if anyone had caught it in time. They didn't. She collapsed in early 1988, went into cardiac arrest during surgery. She was 12 years old. 4 months later, Poltergeist 3 was released. At the end of the credits, there was a dedication card with her name. When the crew realized she hadn't finished recording all her dialogue for the final scenes, they faced a decision. Some lines were dubbed by another actress. But for one moment, one of the last lines her character speaks in the film, they used Heather's actual voice, pulled from earlier recordings. Not a stand-in, not a substitute. Her real voice, speaking from the other side of something none of them could explain. That's the thing about Poltergeist 3. You hear a ghost before you see one. People can debate whether curses are real, but when you lay out the facts one after another, it's hard not to see a pattern. A franchise built on disturbing the dead, a production that literally used human remains, documented, sourced, purchased to save money. And then, one by one, the people connected to it started dying. 4 principal cast members, 4 deaths, all within 6 years of the first film's release. The movie warned audiences what happens when you build on top of the dead without permission. The production found out firsthand. The studios have their dead. The hotels have theirs. A few blocks down Hollywood Boulevard from everything else sits the Hollywood Roosevelt, open since 1927 and still hosting guests who checked in during the Golden Age and never left. There is a mirror in this building that shouldn't be able to do what it does. It came from Suite 1200, the room Marilyn Monroe lived in during the late 1940s, when she was still Norma Jean, a young model trying to break into pictures, before the world knew who she was, before the name meant anything. In 1985, during a major renovation, the hotel relocated that full-length mirror from Suite 1200 down to the lobby. And that's when it started. Reports describe people waiting for the elevator seeing a woman in the mirror, blonde, standing just behind them in the reflection. They'd turn around, no one there. They'd look back at the mirror. She was still there, along with a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature, the cold arriving right in front of the glass, as if the air around her reflection existed at a different temperature than the rest of the lobby. And then, faint, unmistakable, the scent of Chanel No. 5, her signature perfume, appearing with the chill, gone the moment it warmed back up. She's always slightly turned in the reflection, like she's about to look at you, but never quite does, still checking, still making sure she's ready before stepping out into a world that no longer exists. After enough reports came in, management moved the mirror to a secure, non-public area of the hotel. It's no longer accessible, but reports from people standing near where it used to hang still describe catching the chill, the scent arriving before anything else. Marilyn died in 1962 at 36 in her home in Brentwood. She hadn't lived at the Roosevelts in over a decade, but something of her stayed in that glass. And the Roosevelt has other residents too. Up on the 9th floor, in room 928, the haunting is different. Paranormal researchers classify what happens here as an intelligent haunting, a presence that doesn't just replay like a recording, but actually interacts. Reports describe the sensation of someone gently tucking blankets around guests in the middle of the night, a cold in the hallway that follows you rather than sitting in a fixed spot. That's Montgomery Clift. He stayed in room 928 for 3 months in 1953 while filming From Here to Eternity. He was 32, already a major star, and he was obsessed with getting the performance right. He even learned to play trumpet for the role, practicing in that room over and over until he had it down. He'd pace the 9th floor hallway at 2 in the morning, running his lines, perfecting every beat. 3 years later, a car accident destroyed half his face. Surgeons rebuilt it, but it was never quite right. The pain was constant. The pills to manage the pain became something else. For the next 10 years, he slowly fell apart. By the time he died in 1966 at 45, he wasn't the same man who'd stayed in room 928. But room 928 doesn't have the ghost of the man who died in 66. It has the ghost of the man from 1953, still practicing, still pacing, still trying to get it right. An imprint of someone at the peak of his ambition, burned into that room so deeply it keeps replaying, night after night, for anyone who happens to be listening. And down in the old ballroom, reports describe people following the sound of piano music into an empty room, only to see a man in a white suit standing at the instrument. When they get close, he looks up, smiles, and walks straight through a door that opens onto a solid wall. The Roosevelt opened in 1927, funded by a group that included some of the biggest names in early Hollywood: Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Sid Grauman. The first Academy Awards ceremony was held there in 1929, a 15-minute ceremony, back when no one knew if any of this would last. Some of the people who were there at the beginning never left. The Roosevelt isn't haunted by tragedy, it's haunted by ambition, by people who were at the beginning of something, who believe that if they just worked hard enough, if they got it perfect, everything else would follow. Marilyn checking her face one more time, Clift running his lines at 2 in the morning. They stayed because they weren't finished yet. The Roosevelt keeps its dead inside. The last place on this list keeps them in the ground, or tries to. Just a few blocks from Paramount, behind iron gates on Santa Monica Boulevard, sits a cemetery called Hollywood Forever, where old Hollywood has been buried since the silent film era, and where something has been visiting one particular grave for nearly 100 years. Reports describe a woman dressed in black, long mourning veil, vintage clothing, dark gloves, appearing near one particular crypt. She moves the way people move in old films, slowly, deliberately, as if time runs differently where she stands. She leaves a flower, and then she's gone. When people get close, she vanishes. Turn away for a second, look back. She's there again. The sound of high heels clicking across the mausoleum floors has been reported when no one living is inside. And sometimes, faintly, the smell of funeral flowers, lilies, the heavy, sweet scent of arrangements that haven't been placed there in decades. The grave she visits belongs to Rudolph Valentino, one of the very first movie stars. When Valentino died in 1926, he was only 31 years old. The public reaction was massive. Over 100,000 people lined the streets for his funeral. There were riots outside the funeral home. Several women reportedly took their own lives in the days after his death was announced. He was the first movie star to die young, the first time the public had to mourn someone they loved but had never actually met. Shortly after his burial, a woman started appearing at his crypt, always alone, always in black. She'd leave a single red rose, and then she'd leave. No explanation, no name. The press called her the Lady in Black. She came every year, sometimes more often, for decades. Eventually, she stopped. People assumed she died. But the visits didn't stop. That's when the reports started. A woman in vintage black clothing, standing near Valentino's crypt, vanishing when approached, reappearing when no one's looking. An imprinted devotion so deep it outlasted the woman who felt it, still playing out year after year, long after both she and the man she mourned turned to dust. Who she is, whether she's the original Lady in Black returned, or something her decades of devotion left behind, or something that was always there, no one knows. But the roses keep appearing, and Valentino's ghost has been reported elsewhere too. At his old estate in Benedict Canyon, a place called Falcon Lair, reports of apparitions go back to the year he died. He owned that house for only 11 months before his death, but he's been there ever since. Actor Harry Carey leased the place in the late 1920s and gave an interview to the Associated Press, saying the place felt haunted, and those words have been in the public record for nearly a century. Since then, reports describe figures in the stables, the sound of a horse when there's no horse there, something cold brushing against an outstretched hand, a figure at the second-floor window looking out over the city. He owned Falcon Lair for 11 months. He's been haunting it for a century. The haunted mansions that held their secrets too tightly, the studios built next to the dead, the hotels where ambition burns so bright it left an imprint that won't fade. These aren't the ghosts of people who were lost. These are the hauntings of people who knew exactly where they were. The celebrities who loved the work, who loved the fame, who loved the feeling of being seen, they never really left the only city that made them feel alive. In haunted Hollywood, some doors don't close. The ones that opened during the Golden Age, they're still open now.